Nice to see you here. A few of these people are people who are champions of the green building industry in India, Laurie. There's one young man who keeps coming in called Shamsuddin from Kampala in Uganda. Hello, Shamsuddin. Nice to see you again. And I should call you Shamsuddin and not Shamsuddin, as we will call them in India. Okay. Sandeep is here today. Sandeep, Laurie might know. Arun may not know. Everyone, it's a small crowd, and I'll assume that the numbers will grow as we go along. This time, to all of you out there, I must tell you that we have made it 60 minutes instead of 90 minutes as we have had in the past. And the challenge is in some ways going to be reflected in this conversation with Laurie, Trevor Deutsch, and Arun Sitaram. Laurie comes from Montreal, and Arun is from Bangalore. Both have been known to me for some time. The Prem Jain Memorial Trust launched this monthly series of the Colloquium to explore issues and concerns of sustainability beyond all the well-meant programs and commercial activities of certification of buildings by industry agencies and other associations, all of which claim share of what is called green business for buildings. And this is large in India. It's possibly hard for someone like Laurie to understand how we had 10 billion square feet of, or nearly 10 billion square feet of certification in the last, say, 6 to 7 years in India. You know the figures of LEED in Canada as a member of the board of LEED itself. The session today is on how we can impute or impart sustainable thinking into decision making. In a certain sense, the challenge that we have had at the Colloquium or at the Living Building series showcases the challenge that consumers or managers have in decision making. One is, of course, ignorance. Second, even many CXOs, let alone lay consumers, haven't heard of sustainability. And third is that solution providers don't have the bandwidth to make themselves known with, shall we say, branding efforts or outreach efforts to let people know of what's available as solutions from them. The fourth is making working professionals or students understand its importance and persuading organizations that they work for or lead. How do you look for inflections, sift data, analyze and seek solutions for projects large or small? How much of it is experience? How much of it is methodology? And how do we make methodology more important than experience in itself? How do we frame solution frameworks that other professionals can learn from on the multiple variables you heft and evaluate before taking a decision or while taking a decision? This morning, architect K.T. Ravindran, who is the first director of SP&A and a grand old man of architecture in a certain sense in India, says in an exchange, in my view, climate change, he says, is already rolling and we cannot stop this avalanche. Or I think he meant the Armageddon. The measures we humans take to reduce carbon emissions, etc., can only be a balm. While the inevitable will happen, what we can do is not mitigation, but improve our preparedness to reduce damage to life and property. And that was K.T. Ravindran. But is that the resigned view we should take? Should we not push governments to stop, shall we say, felling forests, to halve water and energy use with aggressive demand-side management in our cities, bring sharp measures to drop central air conditioning of buildings? A city like Bangalore has 1.2 billion ton TR of central air conditioning, which means about 60 crore liters or 600 million liters of water per day of consumption, only to keep the air conditioning systems going. And that is pre-COVID figures. We know things have changed dramatically since then. Is it enough that we do a bit of green on buildings and justify it with some ratings? Laurie and Arun come from a standpoint where they don't count so much the benefit that an individual may gain. And that was one interesting conversation I had had with Laurie and Gagan Agarwal, who's also present here today on the attendee list, maybe 3 weeks ago. What's the stake for a company or an organization or a government in not doing things sustainably? What is the cost, that is, of not doing? What's the gain for a company from having its officers and workforce know how to think sustainability when they go about decision making? Back to the story of this colloquium itself, the series that is. I have seen here a reflection of that challenge. As people who are staging this series, we don't yet know how to reach out to people and whether what's presented here is of interest to and to whom. So the message itself is questioned sometimes instead of the medium. Are we getting our content right? Should we get popular celebrity speakers? Is the content too heavy and therefore not understood by the people who are supposed to be target listeners? Is the time of day not right? Maybe it should be after work hours like this one. Maybe it's too long, like the past sessions of Colloquium were, and so we clipped from 90 to 60 minutes. In all this, the very purpose is sidelined in some ways. Where does the challenge lie when it comes to making people see what's under our very noses? That a Bombay is sitting on a time bomb when it comes to inundation threats and massive soil erosion are parts of islands elsewhere, of those islands around Bombay, sinking in the next 30 years is a threat that we all know. In fact, the oldest Parsi Agyari, or the fire temple, was demolished this time when we had the floods 3 weeks ago. 30 years, people say, for that Armageddon to happen to the world. We know how in 3 weeks, COVID brought us to our knees. It's a long time in some ways, 30 years. We have nothing to worry about, they shrug. Jared Diamond, in his second book, says the world of humans have only time till 2030 to reverse things dramatically. Cities like Bangalore have today only half as municipal water to the current daily demand, and yet, merrily, over the last 20 years, Bangalore has constructed, like I said earlier, 1,200 million TR chiller plants that demand 50, 60 crore liters of water, which is not even recorded anywhere, as a matter of fact. And this is against the drinking water demand in India, in Bangalore, of about 130 crore. I could take similar figures for, let's say, the agglomeration that's called Delhi or that's called Mumbai. The game of building certification now has 4 players in India, all of them coveting the 400, 500 crore market that it is set to grow into from the current 100 and 150 crores, let us say, that it is. But how do we go beyond buildings into communities of the poor, into wards, into residential communities, and into our vast hinterland of 600,000 villages and those farmer communities? Laurie, by the way, will want to present today on the concept, he says to me, was it yesterday, of a small farming community versus a multinational mining company in the Saskatchewan ranges of Canada, and how the resolution happily turned out to be good. I don't know the size and scale of that project and mission that Laurie led. I'm sure we will hear about it from him today. Maybe he will want to touch upon the work his group did in Rio de Janeiro with the Favelas, which is a better equivalent of the poorer districts of our city slums. We have Anita Reddy here, who has been battling these challenges of the slums in Bangalore from 1985. So you count the number of years. Now, every third citizen in Bangalore, Laurie, is from the slums. Every guy who delivers your Flipkart material or your Amazon stuff lives in the slums in Bangalore. When earnest leaders who can see the threat evangelize at great pains, like we do at this forum of the Colloquium or at the Living Building series or the Rethinking Cities that we are running elsewhere, or the Wow Bangalore series that's set to start anytime now, we meet with a cold response, even from those who are within the green building industry, shall we say. If you are here today listening and engaging with us today, like Ram and many others who have joined in, well, you are a rare exception of someone with the talent for listening and for absorbing elements in a way you can use it in your own lives and make responsible decisions. So far, post-COVID, we have brought in about 100 speakers from India over, I think, about 32 or 34 webinars that we have held, and people from all 5 continents, barring the polar cap, shall we say. And yet we have little as enthusiasm and nothing as impact we can measure with things that we have done. So how do you make real sustainability, not the business kind, not the, but the transformative kind, shall we say? How do you make such sustainability sexy and interesting for the millennial and the Gen Zer? That is the question. And I believe that Arun will have some things for us to offer on that. How do we stop? Well, a larger question. The brutality of public expenditure on central coal-based power plants and nuclear plants. You know that Germany has stopped it. Japan has stopped it. will India ever consider looking at such prospects? How do we get governments and business and citizens to focus on demand side efficiencies? How do we halt the work on the 2,300 dams in Arunachal Pradesh or those in the fragile and vulnerable Uttarakhand, and yet find solutions for energy deficiency with energy efficiency, not with power generation? Same goes for water, and I don't want to say much more on that. The first colloquium took us through a certain landscape of jobs in India. We moved on to the second one in June, where we held one titled, I think, Does India Still Rest in the Villages? And we brought two wonderful people, Geeta and Ramani, and had them interface with two urban architects. Well, nothing has moved since then. It's just remained ceremonial. Every webinar, I have hoped, will bring some change, even in the ways that the speakers who come in and those participants as attendees who come in will make some change or get together at least to bring in some action. That has not happened. With the third edition too, which was with Sean Foley from Australia, from Queensland, and another guy called Jean Grebet from Paris, with the third person from Chandigarh in India, Jeet Kumar. Yet again, after that third edition, I was hoping that there will be some change. Yet the appeal for the audience has been incredibly low. An hour of such a discussion, I'm hoping, will offer much more from thinkers of the kind these two men represent. So here we are with the fourth edition of the colloquium, not certain whether we are succeeding to penetrate the opaque walls of people's minds out there. Are we reaching the right people? Are we having the right things discussed that's of interest to the audience? Does the audience think this is too complicated and beyond their understanding? The quest has been the same for the other two, Arun and Laurie, with me at the studios here today. I've had the privilege of knowing both of them, as I said. Well, they don't know each other at all, but that doesn't matter today because there is a meeting of minds that you will see is uncommon. What is common to us is our enduring concern for how on earth we get it across. We can get it across to people that the planet simply has no time anymore. That decision-making at home or at work has to be imbued with such thinking at the everyday levels. When I asked Laurie to talk on these shall we say, far larger issues, he wrote back promptly saying, if I could solve these in 20 minutes, I could have the Nobel Peace Prize. So this colloquium of this month is aimed at stimulating action on such education. Hope is that associations like the SRAE, ASHRAE, CII, and IGBC, CREDAI, and Builders Association of India, and ACC, and a host of others like ASOCHAM or LEAD in India and Gruha will learn to get to the root of these challenges and not remain at the periphery of only exploiting the potential for business that these new age demands on resource efficiency represent. Laurie also is on the board, as I said earlier, of the board of members of LEAD Canada. Well, he is part of the Canada-India Center of Excellence and of the Ottawa-based Carleton University. Gagan Agarwal in India represents the Carleton University. Arun, well, you could go first on a spell of whatever, 12, 15 minutes. Then Laurie could pitch in with his insights and experience. It would be nice if you, Laurie, if you shared your experiences of where you failed with communities, what you found inspiring from interactions with communities, or in classroom sessions with aspiring engineers or architects or your own staff, in the company that you have built over time. I know you wear multiple caps. I'm not going to speak about this. All of it is to you all, ladies and gentlemen. It's available on the chat box, so you could possibly look it up. Well, it's now time for Arun to take over. There is also a note on why this colloquium and what the overarching elements of this colloquium are. Maybe you want to check that out also, all of you out there. Ashok Natkarni, I acknowledge your presence. Bhavani of Rohan Builders, many others who are there. Wonderful to have you all here. Good evening once again to both of you. Arun Sitaram.
Is the slide visible?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, go
Okay.
on.
Good evening. I I understand where Hari and others are coming. It's just that I come from a domain of education which really does not see this problem the way it has to be. The young minds that are in the education as yet still learning about it still consider all this information that is told to them is as something that activists talk about, or it's just leave it to the activists, they know much more, and they just are going to be talking to the government and fixing this problem. And it's not my problem. And that's primarily why we find that education is very, very critical. And whatever these problems are, that either the industry is seeing it or governments are seeing it, but young minds are not seeing it. The people, the so-called millennials, don't see that as a problem. And it's still in their mind that all this is only activist driven. They're using it for whatever purposes that it brings publicity for them. But other than that, it's hardly anything that's so real. The reason is a lot of these cases haven't gone down to them. And it's always understood that education is a great tool that helps enhance the entire process of decision making. Today, young minds are making decisions without even knowing, what is the value of that decision that they're taking and what impact it's going to have on people that's there. And why is that happening? Largely, while it plays a very, very important role in behavioral change, are we really investing that amount of effort in the education space to ensure that these people understand the importance of these things? How many cases of what either Laurie is going to present or what Hari has been talking about is today talked about in the academic space, whether it's in the higher education or schools or any of the education that is imparted right now, whether it's in India or all over the world. But I'll keep my comment specific to India. In India, it doesn't happen. And again, when most of them build IEC strategies that I have seen through many proposals, whether it's the UNESCO proposal, a UNDP proposal, or a World Bank proposal, or any of the proposal that goes in, they say we have a fantastic IEC strategy. But if you look at that strategy, the whole focus is on the I and C, which is the information and communication. Very little investment actually goes into building a very strong education curriculum, because the reason is curriculum are outside of the entire environment and the other fraternity. Just to give you an example, the environment curriculum that is taught today in the higher education colleges of engineering, the syllabus is mandated and written by Supreme Court, taking all the chapters that are coming in from 8th standard, 9th standard, 10th standard, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade students. And that is what they did. It's a mandatory course with no credit. But I have to do it because Supreme Court has asked me to do this, not because I want to know why that environment is important for me. So the real investment in the education part of any IEC strategy today does not exist. Why am I coming to this conclusion is just because when somebody says sustainability is important, if we don't do that, we will have major problems going forward. Sadly, sustainability is reduced to a chapter that students will learn in school. They'll score some marks and forget about it. Or for all the civil engineers and others, it's an elective subject. That means it's a choice that I make. If I'm interested to study the subject, unless I know that I can score more numbers, I wouldn't even choose that subject to study. This is where we have reduced ourselves into, and this is what the next generation is learning right now, which is what is more scary than what you can say of the existing generation that we're talking about. So they will never respect. And why is it that this is happening? Most of the people are really unaware that sustainability has gone way beyond these movements or regulations. They say, oh no, their job is just to make some regulations and they're going to, the Green Tribunal will take care of all that stuff. But they've never really understood or digested the fact, or not even told about or taught about, that today sustainability is a strategic concern for markets as well. And sustainability also has been delivering a lot of ROIs which are better for businesses too. Not just from the CSR point of view, but even from real money cost effective point of view as well. So engineers and entrepreneurs are fully educated that sustainability today is also about efficiency, and cost benefits beyond tax ops are there. They're just not told about it. I mean, you have architects and engineers, you just ask them to read the syllabus and find out, you will find there'll be hardly anything that is there. And it is never, because I have not learned about it, I'm not going to use that as part of my pitch to my client and will not use that as an important component for him to consider for a long-term opportunity in his decision-making process. Because I have not contributed as an engineer or an architect or an entrepreneur, I have not used that as a tool that is part of the decision-making process. And the reason is I am just not aware, or I am not convinced, or I have not seen a case where it can really say that I can show efficiency in that. So what's wrong with the present education strategies? I mean, there are a lot of things that are wrong. People imagine the new education policy will bring a magic wand and that will turn around everything and people will start thinking about it. That's not true. That's never going to happen. But I'll just stick to two key problems that we've never addressed. The first problem that I'm looking at is a lot of academia is still stuck with teaching young minds to say what is sustainability and why sustainability is important. And that ends the matter of education. Sadly, it's not about that. Okay, you told me what it is. I know why it's important, but how do I do something about it? Or how is it that I go about doing it? Whether in my practice, in my job, in my work, or even in my future studies. How can I do research in sustainability such that I can bring in new concepts that are going? I have no clue about it. So that is when young minds are never taught about how, and which is again not part of a curriculum. No curriculum today talks about how. Everybody wants to tell if you know what and why, you know how to run that. And that's been a major problem with our education system. Just to get a pun out of it, this entire building series should have been part of something that people should have been looked at it, because what Laurie is presenting as a case is an actual live case. How much of that translates into a curriculum in an institution? Really nothing. It's just left to this, and interested individual students will come and learn, and maybe that makes them a differentiator in the market space. Or they'll say, oh, this person is another sustainability architect. That's the way people view it as. The millennials is the second biggest problem. I don't think our education system really understands how to handle millennials. They are extremely difficult to handle, and traditional methods and traditional systems of making them aware is very tough. If you go and tell him that, look, this is what it has to happen, be prepared that they will go to Google and check. And if it is not there on Google, they'll say this guy is lying. How much ever you expect the person to be truthful, that is how they work, that is how they learn, and that is how they study. And they don't like anything of sitting in lectures and being lectured about or given some homework activities and think it's very much of the school, because they'll say, tell me something that's not already on Google. If it is there, I'll go find it. Don't come and give me lectures about something which I have to really read about. Show me how I'm going to do it. That is where most of our teachers and faculties fail today. They've never been able to upgrade themselves to go beyond the what and why and understand how, so that they can transfer that knowledge to them. So that itself is another key factor for the knowledge transfer not happening and ensuring people believe in sustainability. Millennials like to work collaboratively. Today's children study in coffee shops more than sitting in silent libraries. If a librarian tells these millennials to say, silent, this is supposed to be a silent place, they'd rather leave the library and go and sit in a coffee shop and study. And they like learning engagements which are very visual and auditory. For example, if you're showing them a few graphs and saying, this is the impact that you'll have if sustainability is not taken seriously. And whether it's an English language or any other subject, that is what they need to understand as the importance of going and how to go about doing it. You can do this in your locality by doing this. This is an experience that comes. This happened in peri-urban localities with industry and the rural community that is there on the outskirts of the city. So they like to understand more of these cases and like to dig deep into it and find out exactly how this is happening and what is happening, either out of personal interest or as part of what they want to say as their learning. And they are no longer going to be worried about marks, which is what most of them look at as marks cards and stuff like that. And they also want that this has to be very relevant. Is it relevant? Is it contemporary to my times? Is it something that is real for me? How is it going to impact me? If I remember one of the lecturers said, if you don't do this, your future generations will have a problem. He said, if I live only, my future generation will come. If I don't live, why should I worry about it? And why should I worry about something that future generation is? You tell me what will impact me. I'm interested to know how it's going to impact me. So I think that is where it has become more about me that they are interested in. And they also want to see how technology can help them learn this on their own pace and not just given them a data dump and say, you go read this. So they're not going to read 100 newspaper articles or 100 journal articles to find out and ascertain the truth of what is being told by the faculty or the panelists that's going to be there. So that's where they're only saying, give me what is relevant. I'll only take that. And it has to be relevant to my time that I can do something about it. And this is how I go about doing it. If you give me that, I'll act. Otherwise, I'm just going to be a listener and I'm not going to do anything about it. Also the rational. If I don't say that this is going to benefit me and I'm not providing a rational answer to these students, they don't want to understand or even spend a 1 minute time beyond going that whole thing. For example, a case study on Bangalore and water, he says, you understand the problem, but you tell me how am I going to solve it? Do you have solutions for it? Can you tell me something that I can drive? Can you tell me something that I can influence my parents? Can you tell me something I can work with my own friends, form a group and start working and bringing that change about people? So they are more interested in doing that kind of thing rather than bringing them with a problem statement. They want to know, how do I go about solving it as well? Again, they like less lectures. They don't like to be told for hours together, but then say, take this, work with your students, find out, come back, and then evolve over a period of time. And that's what they also like doing in terms of their work. And they also like to dirty their hands. I mean, today they are no longer worried about trying to get a job or trying to do something right or not right. They're okay to try. But if you're able to give them hands-on and application-based case studies that says, look, this has been tried and tested, why don't you test it in other place? They'll be glad to take it and go. But if you try it out and give an abstract to them, it's never going to happen because they don't like that kind of thing that happens. So they need to see how I can apply it. Monday morning solution is what I want. And can I try? I don't mind failing. And that's one of the great things that they have. They're not afraid of failing. And that is one of the advantages that we can leverage with them. So the point that I'm coming, what I'm trying to say is, if we intend sustainability to part of decision making, the time is now to invest in developing an education strategy that enables young minds to not just learn how to include sustainability, also using learning strategies that engage the millennials the way they like to learn. The problem is both these have to happen together. It cannot happen in isolation. If we are going to say that sustainability has to be in every single subject, and it has to be projects, there has to be cases told about it, saying that this is how we've done it and we've shown it and it has worked. That is an area where we really don't have, and any of the education materials and curriculums today need to start incorporating these things, which are cases that have happened practically, and industry has to bring that forward and say this is how it is, or communities have to bring it forward and say this is how it is and integrate them into education. If we don't do that, we'll not get a behavioral change with students, and it will not make them part of the decision making process and saying, no, we believe in that. As an architect, we feel you should look at this, and this is what it's going to do for the future. And they will never own it up because they have not owned it up themselves and don't believe it in themselves. And what they don't believe, they don't want to preach to others. So that's the reason why I had, and with that, I end what I had to say, and will be glad to take questions or take it afterwards.
Thank you, Arun. It's such a joy to have speakers like you who stick to their time frames, who are articulate, who are very precise in what they want to present. It's always been a joy having you, Arun, in each of these meetings over the years. Laurie, it's your turn now. You have all the time. You know what struck me when you spoke that day? It was a morning for you, and no, it was a morning for me, and it was pretty late in the night for you that morning here in India. And Gagan was also with us. And you said something about how it's not about the individual who needs to be gaining from this. We need to address it at these levels of the organization. And then you turn to speak about the Favelas and about Rio de Janeiro and your work on the coal mining sector there. Before you speak, or before maybe you can put on your deck, you can share your deck now. While I acknowledge the presence of Dr. R.K. Somani, thank you for being here, Somani Saab. Very nice to have distinguished leaders like you. We have also Sandeep Goswami and Sandeep Talwalkar, both architects in a certain sense. Both thinkers, both wanting to see what they can do. They spent about 20 years each on how they can bring such change. You know, I must confess to all of you out there, you don't have access to what is it called? The participants list that we have got here. We have a grand total of 20 people participating, apart from the speakers, of course, today. And that shows you, and mind you, this was sent to something like 6,000 people. Some such number, that we have had on the mailing base. I sent it yesterday and the day before to about 400 plus people who are on my WhatsApp groups. That is, these are people who know what I stand for. And yet we have under 20 people. Laurie Trevor Deutsch, your turn.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really quite an honor to be part of this. I have been learning a great deal about your organization, and I really commend what it is that you're doing, especially at this time. I think that I was listening very carefully with what Mr. Arun was talking about. I agree with everything that he said. I think that there is an issue with practical applications of these. There's a lot of theory floating around, and I think I'm going to address some of that, because I am a very firm believer that even when there's an undaunting task ahead, the old concept of lighting a candle in the darkness is better than being in the dark. So we do what we can within our own realm to try to deal with this issue of sustainable development. I'm going to give a case study today, which I think is very appropriate and to what Mr. Arun was talking about, dealing specifically with community engagement. But first, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of our organization. LEAD is an organization that stands for Leadership for Environmental Development. It was developed, the concept was developed in 1991 as a result of the Rio conference. It was an outcome of the Rio conference, and it is based on training a way of thinking to emerging leaders. And that is, the thinking at the time was that there is a group of people who will be in leadership positions sometime in the future, whether that be the baby boomers, as I was at the time, or the millennials as they are today. At some point they will be in positions of power. So that the idea is to impart a certain philosophy early in their career that they can take with them. And what we do is we do things that are very practical. So we do a certain amount of theory, but most of it is hands-on. And this addresses what Mr. Arun was talking about. The beauty of the LEAD program is that there is no typical LEAD fellow. When I took the program back in 2007, I believe, my particular cohort consisted of myself. I was a consultant for the World Bank at the time. I was sitting next to somebody who was an oil executive, a petroleum executive with Shell Canada, a courier company, anti-poverty advocates, green proponents. It was an entire mix. These were people who would normally never get in the same room together, never talk. And certainly through the course of the training, there were many heated discussions. But the point is that we learned to talk to each other, we learned to discuss, we learned to communicate. And even though our approaches were different, the goal was the same. And that is a desire for sustainability. The program has currently 2,500, this is an old, this is about close to 3,000 people all over the world. We have programs, actually quite a substantial program in India, as well as Canada, Mexico, South America, throughout Africa, throughout Southeast Asia, and in Europe. To give you an idea of the impact of the program, many people who have come out of the LEAD program are now in positions of influence and leadership. In Canada here, David McGuinty is a Canadian Member of Parliament. He's actually my Member of Parliament here in Ottawa. The new Mayor of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum, is a LEAD Fellow, and she also has 5 of her team who are LEAD Fellows. Mark Botami, a good friend of mine, is the Minister of ICTs in Malawi, and there's even a Vice President, a World Bank Vice President who is a LEAD Fellow. So the concept of training early, imparting a certain philosophy to move into positions of influence has been achieved over the last 20, 25 years. The approach to learning is very much hands-on. We do a certain amount of training, we do some knowledge. I'm an academic, I love the academic side of things, but I know that in order to achieve change, you have to be practical. So we do dialogues, we do a number of hands-on sessions which we call challenge sessions, where we put people we're training into real life situations, whether they be domestic. In Canada, we call domestic challenges and international challenges. So we take people from Canada dealing with domestic sustainable development issues, and we have taken, and as Dr. Hari Haran has said, we've taken groups internationally, such as the Favelas of Rio, to deal with situations. So we don't teach sustainable development, we teach a way of thinking. One of the projects we did work on in Rio de Janeiro was a self-sufficiency project. We were brought in by actually it was a lead fellow in Rio to talk to and do some community engagement and do some business planning for a group of a favela in Rio. In Rio, a number of the favelas were at the time called pacified, which means they had been run by drug lords, they had been run by crime syndicates, and step by step they pacified. They got rid of the bad influences in the favelas and allowed the people to take control. So we were brought in just after a pacification project, and within a small community who had been donated a sewing machine or a series of sewing machines. And how could they take those sewing machines and develop some self-sustainable component to their lives? And this is one of our projects, and that's something I can talk about perhaps in another session. We were also brought into Indonesia to look at self-sustaining projects such as agricultural projects. And as you see here, these are the steam geysers in parts of Indonesia where they used to generate power. That in itself is an interesting case study. In each case, when we do this type of training, this type of leadership training, we look at 4 particular aspects. First of all, did the participant enjoy it? That's very, very important. Second, did the participant learn something? Was there some value in just other than having a good time? Third is, can that participant apply what they've learned? And the fourth component is, can the actions of the application have an impact? And these are the 4 pillars that we use for learning outcomes. This one here, the fourth, being the most important and of course the hardest to measure. So on that basis, let me give you an example of a domestic challenge that we did here in Canada. And it is a case study of community engagement in rural Saskatchewan. To give you some aspect of the background, a company called Western Potash was a large multinational corporation, and it wanted to develop a potash mine within a quiet farming community in rural Saskatchewan. The mine would have a life of 100 years. The community was affluent and living in a very pristine environment. The community was obviously concerned about this particular potential project. And again, to give you a little bit of perspective, we're talking about central Canada here. It's a little town called Lajord, Saskatchewan, which, if you know your Canadian geography, is near Regina. And again, to put things in perspective, this is what Lajord looks like in winter. If you ever want to see a stereotype of Canada, here it is. It is pristine, it is flat. These in summer are all wheat fields. This is how they get around the wheat fields in winter. And this is what it looks at night. It is a beautiful community. This is what a typical potash mine looks like once it's fully commissioned. This is a potash mine in a city called Esterhazy, which is not far from the target site. This is inside the mine. So you see that this is a fairly intrusive process, and you can imagine why the community had some concerns. Before we were brought in, before our trainings were brought in, there had been some community engagement by the company, but it really was reluctant to engage fully. It really was more of a sales pitch to the community rather than the full engagement. The community had suspicions about the company and really believed that the concerns were not being heard. As you can see, an active mine can be very intrusive both environmentally and socially. Again, a quiet little community, and you're looking at bringing in a fairly large potash mine with a 100-year lifespan. So our job, or the trainees' jobs, was to go into the community, to facilitate communication, to engage the community in the decision-making process and to get the company to hear and understand the concerns of the community. And in a process that we call mutual gains negotiation, and we don't like to use the term win-win because they're very rare situations where both parties win in a negotiation. And the concept of winning has a certain connotation, and very often at the end of negotiations, you haven't really won, but you have come out a little bit better than you had expected. So we use this term mutual gains negotiation. And the process that we use in community engagement is something called leadership by curiosity. And we come in as neutral parties. We talk, we emphasize neutrality. We get some ideas of the issues. We inquire, we probe. We try to find out really what the core issues are. So we go in there and we try to bring out what is really the core issue and the root of the problem in the community. In this particular case, everybody from the community was invited to participate. The invitation came from the local government, not from the company itself. We did the session in winter when more people could participate. These are farmers, so it was much easier to get people to participate for a day. If we tried to do it now, we would get nobody because everybody's harvesting. And the session was held pretty well in a neutral area. It was held at a local hockey arena. There was skepticism from all sides. The company was skeptical, the government was skeptical, the community was skeptical. There was just an uneasy feeling about this whole process and about the project in general. So I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of this process as visually as I can. And just to give you an idea, this is the initial session, and I want you to look at the body language. I want you to look at the position of people, the look in their eyes, the folded arms, the facial expressions. This is what things look like when we started. Again, somebody, and I want you to keep a look on this person, and I want you to take a look at this person here as we go forward. The key to community engagement is that people don't want to be lectured or hear a speech. You want to value their time. We want to ask probative questions. And again, this gets back to leadership by curiosity. You want to really make a connection with the community. You want to really get them to feel and understand what they are feeling, and allow them to feel that you are understanding what their concerns are. We accept all comments, but we try to keep these sessions focused, because these sessions, if you don't control them, can go in all sorts of directions. To start off with, we launched various sessions, participatory sessions, where people could really get out all their thoughts. And as you can see from a couple of our trainees here, we have sticky notes. In this particular case is, what information do you want? And it stimulates a discussion. Here, what are the concerns about the mine project in the regional municipality? And you see, there's a lot of sticky notes here. We're pulling out a lot of ideas. Nothing is dismissed. Now, start to take a look at the change in body language here. Look at the faces. You know, you still have some reluctance, but look at this woman. I don't know if you remember this woman from the first slide. This is another person, I think, from one of the earlier slides. We brought that person in. That person had a lot to say, and nobody was listening to him. Again, another person who was sitting back is now engaged, fully engaged. More pictures. As you can see over time, the level of engagement grows and grows and grows, and skepticism starts to turn into something quite serious, where people realize that they have a voice and that the concerns are being heard. What we learned is that the community and the company were really not that far apart. The community simply wanted communication and assurances. People want to know that they've been heard. The community also was trying to tell the company that there were obvious problems that the company was not listening to. The company wanted to build a road in an area that was prone to flooding. And it's not that the community didn't want the road to be built, but they didn't want the road to be built in an area that would be a problem. And all their engineering studies could not identify things that were known to the community. So the community had a really good opportunity, had a role to play in the decision making. How did we deal with the results? Well, we did put together a report, which is a standard kind of an approach, but we also did a role-playing simulation for representatives of the community and the company. So again, we tried something a little bit non-traditional, where we did mock board meetings, mock sessions in front of, again, these are the people here that were part of the original group. The outcome of this particular session, did our participants enjoy it? Yes, the community really enjoyed it. Our trainees absolutely enjoyed it. Did they learn something? Both sides learned a great deal about it, and a lot of this learning was also passed on to the company. Were they able to apply it? Absolutely. And did it have an impact? Well, the process took 4 years, but we're happy to say that 4 years later, the Potash company entered into an agreement with the rural community of Lajord. And it was done with great fanfare and with full community support. And just to give you again some idea of the success, this is our Prime Minister here, Justin, with some of the members, community members of Lajord, a number of years later. And you probably don't know the politics of Canada, but there is a certain alienation of Western populations, certainly to this particular government, and we have the community of Lajord here welcoming the Prime Minister, lots of smiles, lots of good feelings, so we consider this a success. So, oops, there we go, am I still on? So that's, I hope I was within my timeline, Dr. Hari Haran.
Thank you, Laurie, and just call me Hari.
Okay.
And well, it was nice to hear both of you. And you know, well, you stuck to it again, 16 minutes, maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds more than you ought to have taken. But this is a fascinating presentation. Yes, Arun, tell me. Arun, you said something. No. Well, you know, if I were to take Canada's population against its landmass, shall we say, and I took India's landmass and population, you know where the challenge will lie. And I often say this, Laurie, and to many of you who have been in the previous sessions of this kind of a webinar series, you will know that I take this very stark comparison that we have between an Africa and India, not the Indian subcontinent, I'm talking just India, and China. We all have the same population. We have about 1.4 billion people. We are 1/10 Africa's landmass, and we are about 40% China's landmass. That is, China has 2.5 times what India has. And yet we all host the same numbers of people. Well, you know, when someone says that from being a Holocene age planet, it has become an Anthropocene age since about, shall we say, 1990 or 2000, from say 1910 or 1900, it does not make sense to me at all. In the larger context, it is not as profound as it is when you look at just these three land masses. Well, some of these things that whether Arun said or Laurie said, in some ways are fine, that these things are going to take time, but does the planet have the time? Do our communities have time? In the last colloquium, we had Dr. Sean Foley from Brisbane saying that from 2050, which seems to be some kind of a watershed mark for the world, or for India in any case, from 2050 to 2100, he believes that every indication suggests today, with empirical evidence, that India's population will fall from about 1.7 billion at that point to under 1 billion. That is, there would be a dramatic fall of about 40–45%. Somewhat like what Malthus wrote. Absolutely, Laurie. Somewhat like Malthus wrote in 1798. You know the Malthusian theory on how there would be corrections that the planet would bring. Arun, you heard him talking, you know, about how diversity of groups have this unison of objectives sometimes, and so push a particular cause or purpose forward. Interesting that, you know, this was a lead initiative for community engagement. I wish there were more people from the Green Building Council here, which is the equivalent or which is the competition for, shall we say, LEAD in India, Laurie. I'm glad that even if there are as few as 20 odd people today, they are remarkably interesting people. I must acknowledge the presence of another person called K.L. Mohan Rao, who's been working on sustainability challenges and training students for at least the last 10, 12 years that I recall. Nivedita Jadhav, who has been with the Indian Plumbing Association, younger person, but looking at how they can bring in, shall we say, save water missions in our cities and so on. There's another person called Girish from the Association of Consulting Civil Engineers, who is present here today. I wish they could have, the audio access for them to be speaking. But it's nice to know that these discerning leaders, just now Sandeep Taralikar, an architect, is saying that the numbers may be small, but they are discerning. Arun, you got to tell us, you got to see how, you would want to share as an advisor to the state government today on higher education, as to what you are going to do to push things with the Deputy Chief Minister, who is also the Minister for Higher Education here. Is there anything that you can tell us of it? I mean, it can be, it can be completely your personal view. Doesn't matter. This is not going to be heard by anyone in the government.
Well, I do hope somebody in the government also is hearing, and I am saying the same thing to them as well. In fact, effective Monday, I'm starting to revamp the entire diploma students' curriculums that are going to happen. And I think
for the rest of you, if he says diploma, it means polytechnics. We have 129 polytechnic colleges in Karnataka, each of them having about 300 students. That's a large number. Go on, Arun. Sorry.
So there are totally about 1 lakh of students in the diploma stream that come out every year. And they are studying curriculum, which is absolutely ridiculous in many of these things, whether it is for civil engineering, whether it is for mechanical engineering. Engineering itself is in deep trouble, but we didn't want to hit that because they had a lot of other challenges, and the new education policy gave a great opportunity. So what we are saying is some of these people at least should start looking at these things. So we are making a revamp of the curriculum, trying to represent the curriculum and bringing it up to global standards. And that is something that even the new education policy says very clearly. In fact, there is a very specific provision where they have mentioned sustainability and environment as a requirement, a mandatory requirement that has to be included in higher education. They have an entire, I don't have it with me here, but entire clause that says that we need to move towards it. Otherwise, we will not be able to address it. So their focus is on sustainability. Their focus is on biodiversity. The focus is on conservation and not general environment now. So they're getting into more specifics of environment rather than that. So yes, there will be an influence on curriculum that has to change, but the curriculum influence also is to go across the board, not just to say, okay, you take an elective on sustainable buildings. I mean, nobody will take it in the end. Or simply say it is a green building.
I'll stop you there. Honestly, even as you speak, are you convinced that we can bring such enormous change that India needs? Look at Canada. It's 9 million square kilometers, even larger than China. There are 35 million people. They are 1/2 of what we have in our state called Karnataka. When anybody from the West talks to me, I'm sleeping because, I know that they just are not comparable with anything as challenged, even remotely, that we have in India.
So the biggest problem is in the name itself, right? You got lead there, and we don't have even the L of the lead out here. And that's where the problem is. I mean, we get leaders who run education units as I don't know what kind of outfits. But I mean, that has been a problem. If you want to identify a leader to say, even to run a leadership program as what Laurie has been doing, fantastic engagement. Even in our development sector, we have a huge dearth of leadership. And we don't want to confront. We think always that, we're going to wait for something to happen. Oh, they're too big an industrial house. Why should we even try? So I think one of the great things that you've done is to get those people on board and make them work through it. That's why it's a great example. And that's a story you want to tell people. But sadly, many of these cases are not available for our people to really use. That's why it's limited to IIMBs because that is where all the cases start and end. But the 85% of the people who are outside that really don't hear these cases happening anywhere.
For you, Laurie, IIMB is the Indian Institute of Management. Go on, Laurie.
Yeah, I think really the key is that the coursework is very good, it's very valuable, but it does not instill a sense of emotion, because if you're going to implement, there has to be a sense. So when we do our challenges, when we do our training, you have to see this to understand it. At the end of every challenge, people are almost in tears because they have really put everything themselves into it. They see the result. They are, when we went into the favelas, at the end of the sessions, everybody was crying because there was so much emotion. That is what lasts. It's theory is theory. People will roll their eyes and say, yes, I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to take sensitivity training. I have to do this. Until they get their hands dirty, and you mentioned it, until they feel the emotion, they will not apply. And that's why we look at impact as one of the key outcomes of any intervention.
True. True. I
You
think
know,
that's key. That's actually very key. And the problem is that, see, one of the things that you have is the people who come to teach this have dirtied their hands themselves, and
Yes.
know even how to help other people who dirtied their hands. In our case, we have people who teach who not even touched, touched
Arun,
dust.
Arun, when you talk about IEC, informing, educating, communicating, and so on, after a webinar of this kind, if this is not going to be another ceremonial rite, Indians love ceremonies like this. We want wonderful seminars. We want conferences and notch up credits for having done this many of them. What do you think we should be doing as action to see that such people, as Thalolika says, stalwarts like you who spoke today have to be heard, and you have to be given an opportunity to speak with greater depth to what you laid out today as terrain. So what do you think we should be doing? First, Laurie.
I'm sorry, the question?
Okay, I'll go to Arun first, and maybe
Okay,
you'll catch the drift of it.
Yeah.
See, largely, this kind of information of the kind of case that Laurie has been talking about, and many such other cases of how they went about going about doing it, and understanding that as a specific hands-on application case that happened and the outcome that was derived out of it. I'm sure Laurie also has got a lot of learning from that case as well, that they have reproduced it in the following cases.
Sure.
So if we can create a repository that's available of such case studies on sustainability, specific to India, specific to the world abroad, where we can bring in and people can at least read about these cases. Some of these can be actually very, very basic cases, which are small interventions at the household level, or it can be very large, like what Laurie has been bringing about, an entire village that really comes in through.
Yeah.
But at least somewhere where you can create a repository of these, where students can go and learn, or where we can tell students to go and learn, whether they're in the architecture space or engineering space or in the education space that they are in.
And so we go back to square one, Arun, in the sense of, well, the same apathy and indifference to wanting to know more about the cost of not doing. Now, who is going to support or fund an exercise of that kind, even if it is a piffle in terms of what companies and governments spend? That is a challenge. For example, if I were to take the other challenge on demand side, a water supply board, a water utility in a city like Bangalore, if it were to spend only 5% of its money on simply educating people or doing what you call IEC, we would have brought that, the cost of doing that, the cost of not doing it is phenomenal today. Your demand is at 200 crore liters or 2 billion liters. For Laurie's sake, I'm saying it in billions. So how do we, bring about such change when we know that we don't have time at all? And that's been the anguish for the last 20 years in any case. Laurie, your turn to tell us what you think we should do when we clearly know that there isn't a tomorrow.
I don't think that most people believe that there isn't a tomorrow. I'm a child of the 60s. In the 60s, I was told that the world would end in 15 years. In the 70s, I was told the world would end in 15 years. I think that there is an overall skepticism as to the reality of the situation. I think that, and it's a challenge. I don't think I have the answer. I see what's going on in the United States, where there is so much climate change denial, yet at the same time, just this week they had the largest hurricane ever recorded in history, and yet people just shrug their shoulders and say we have to mitigate this, and they don't make the connection between this between the fires in California, it's a real challenge. And I think even with the millennials,
Yeah.
there is a desire, but I don't know that there's
I got
action. And this is why we have to import this emotion.
Right, it's 7:01. I think it's time out for us. Yeah, I know 60 minutes have passed, Laurie, without us knowing it. It's fascinating for us and for these 16, 18 people who are here. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I acknowledge the presence also of Mrs. Renu Jain, Dr. Prem Jain's wife. She's here every time, silently listening. I don't know what she thinks of it, but someday I'm going to sit and ask her as to what she will want to share to the discerning audiences we get to getting here. And even if the numbers are small, I must tell you all, I must acknowledge this, that you are fine people. You guys who make the difference. And I know as leaders, you will take this forward into communities and regions that you work in. Thank you so much once again. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, Laurie.
Thank you very much.
Another
You
time,
too.
yeah. Thank
you
you.
for this.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arun.